Hey everybody, this is Other Side of Hurt podcast. In this podcast, we talk about some of the more difficult things in life. We interview people who are going through suffering and great tragedy, but we also try to find where there is hope and meaning and beauty, even in the most difficult things in life. So we're glad you're joining us today. We're going to try to drop one of these about once a week, at least for the time coming. And so please share these videos, like, subscribe. Thanks for joining us. We're going to dive right into today's topic. All right, so here we are. My name's Tristan. This is my friend Kayla, and this is our first attempt. We are trying to start a podcast, not really knowing what we're doing, but it's a fun thing to attempt. Mm-hmm. And so let's start by we'll just share a little bit of our story. So my wife and I lost our daughter Maria in 2016. So we're coming up on 8 years. It's 8 years. Unbelievable. And now, like, I've been a long-term pastor. I've been a pastor for about 20 years. We just resigned from our pastorate this last year, and there's a whole big story behind this, but we are now running a small grief ministry for specifically families who've lost children. And so we're just trying to figure out, like, what do we do in this season? And so this idea of starting a podcast has been on the back burner for a while. And Kayla and Paul are friends of ours that we've gotten to know over the last couple of years. And in the next episode, Kayla is going to share some of their story. But you guys have a son who was born 2 years ago. Tell us just really quick about Nolan.
So we have a little boy, Nolan, who was born with a lot of medical complexities. And so the first 2 years of his life were really hard. There was a lot of suffering and pain, and we spent a lot of time. Tristan was our pastor.
Yeah, I'm not your pastor anymore.
Not Pastor Tristan. No. And so we just walked alongside of each other. He walked alongside of us, kind of in that year and a half of a lot of hardship, and so we've had a lot of conversations and.
Yeah, and I think as we've been thinking about doing a podcast, part of it is like we want to get the word out. At least somewhat connected to what we're doing with the grief ministry. Like, our little nonprofit really we need to grow, and we want to help people. And so we're hoping this podcast is helpful for people who are going through difficult things. And so we've been thinking about it and praying about it. And I was like, I think Kayla would be really fun. So it's like, this is an experiment.
I'm so flattered.
Yeah, it's great.
I'm so flattered.
It's so much fun. I've also thought, like, I'm kind of a grumpy old man now. You're a lot younger, and you are way more positive than I am.
I'm so much more joyful.
Very much so. Very much so. I've told people, like, I am not fun. I can be funny, but I'm not fun.
Yeah.
And you are a very upbeat and positive person. And just, I think there's a good contrast here. It'll be good to have conversations and talk about things. And one of the reasons, like, we've wanted to endeavor in this together is our stories are very different, but there's a lot of crossover. And so as we've walked with you guys the last couple of years with Nolan, and as you've known us for the last number of years, and we've gone through loss and grief, there's some things that are totally different. Like, Nolan is still with us. Praise God. He's growing. He's doing well. In the next episode, you'll get to share kind of all of what you've been through, but it's so much that you've been through. And so it's different at one level, but in some of the background stuff, there's just so many things that we've just found in common and a lot of crossover.
Yeah, totally.
And so that's one of the things, like, with this podcast that I didn't want to do a podcast that was exclusively about the loss of a child. Yeah. And that's our story. And it's a lot of what Jill and I are working with now. And maybe in time, as we continue to work with Smile Again, I'm sure there'll be people that we meet in our ministry that we'll want to bring on and interview. But I'm really interested in suffering more broadly, in the hard things of life. But then how do we endure those, and how do we find joy? And that is a very common thing between us, is like going through the hardest and most difficult things. And how do you get through it? How do you survive that? And so that's what we want this to be about. So broadly about suffering, but also finding some joy in these things. That's something Jill and I talk a lot about, which is that there's very real sorrow and really real brokenness in this life, but there's also beauty and goodness and joy. And it's not like you're either experiencing one or the other. It's like, in our life anyway, it's like sometimes all jumbled together. And so So we've talked about this, and I've got to say this. I am terrible at naming stuff. I am like the worst. When I was a pastor, like I would always be like, what's the title of this sermon? And it's like, the Gospel of John, chapter 5, verses 30. So like, this is something we've been talking about, and I'm like, I'm terrible at names.
Yeah.
So what thoughts on name? Like we've talked about this. I think we've settled on one.
Yes.
But yeah, what are you thinking?
So yeah, we initially, I think we were headed down the path of like joyful suffering.
Yeah. Which is totally me, because I'm like, what do we want to talk about? Well, we want to talk about suffering and
we want to talk about joy.
So like something like joyful sorrow, or I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like
it's
so
how
plain.
can we combine two very adjective-y words and just put them together. That's kind of what that felt like.
And my sister-in-law, who's great, she was like, no, because like the suffering is not joyful. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. Like, it's not that. Right?
That's where I landed on it. Cause I'm like, no, when you're suffering, there's sometimes zero joy, you know,
right.
Like
the suffering is not joyful necessarily.
Right. Like you can maybe see joy in your suffering.
Yes. That's
post like the depths of it. But, yeah. And then we were kind of, I think maybe it's almost like we were thinking of it too much, but I think so we landed on Other Side of Hurt.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Other Side
That's
of
our
Hurt.
name.
Yeah. That's what we're going with this week. Maybe
that's what it'll be for now.
Yeah.
And our thought process, the way we landed on it is we should just throw out some of our other funny ideas. You had like the sackcloth one. What was that one? It was a mouthful.
Yeah.
I nixed that one because it was too, I'm a speech therapist by trade, and I was like, that is too tricky to say.
I'm so weird and like esoteric and throw out like just strange things. But yeah, like sackcloth, like, which is the image of like biblical image of like of mourning and grief. And I think it was like sackcloth and laughter, which I think is kind of funny. I think it is kind of funny, which we'll get to, like my goal of this podcast, which kind of fits into that. But yeah, it's too much of a mouthful. It's too, But
it's the concept that, we were trying to come up with like, what is like,
what do we want to talk about?
That was my idea. Hard but good. It was just not good. It was a little too descriptive, I think. But yeah, it was this concept of like, it's really hard to put into words how you can simultaneously have immense suffering, but see like glimpses of joy or see goodness that could come from something so terribly hard. So we kind of settled on Other Side of Hurt.
Yeah.
And I think my thought process behind it was, I think what I'm most excited for in the podcast is to like genuinely understand other people's stories and ask questions and be able to see what it's like on the other side of hurt when you're kind of play on words a little bit, but in the midst of hurt, being on the other side of the person that's like, oh, did you hear about that must have been so hard, but actually getting to hear, is it hard? Like, what is life like right now? But then also kind of that other side of hurt where you do get through hurt, doesn't go away, but kind of how did you manage through that, you know? And
that's what, like, I don't want this to be at all of like, I don't like things that are superficial. Yeah. So I don't want to be like, we went through this terrible thing and let me tell you how we got through it. And I just find that to be not, well, one, I don't find it very interesting or real to life. In the sense of like, if people ask me to this day, like, how did you get through like the loss of your daughter? My answer is just like, I have no idea. Like, and I haven't gotten through it. And I don't think there's like this just simple roadmap of like, just hang in there. It'll get better. It's like, no, it's terrible. It's awful. Yeah. And I'm sorry. I want to talk about the worst things in life in this podcast. Like, cause I'm a bleak human being. Yeah. But at the same time. Yeah. Sure. No, I am. But I think like, let's don't gloss over the things that are really painful and difficult. I want to know what certain things are like. So even walking with you guys, like, I want to know what it's like to like care for a child who has just so many problems, and every day you're doing that. And that to me is like the real world in which you live in. And if you had said to me like, we're doing great, I would have been like, shut up. Like, you're not, but you are, there's a joy in your life too. And there's a joy in your love for your son, and there's beauty in that. And so like the other side is not like, oh, we've got through it.
No,
everything's
no.
better. But it's like in the midst of the gritty, in the hard, in the difficult, in the miserable, and whatever, there's still hope. There's still beauty. There's still goodness. And that's what the essence of what the things we hope to talk about. I don't know. Does that?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, not even necessarily like getting to the other side, but just, I don't know. Yeah. What, like the question of how have you changed? You know, like that's a question we talk about a lot, about how at the beginning of your life, there can be this moment where you feel as if your entire world has changed in one evening and you are an entirely new person. And so it's interesting to go through a suffering, and there is another side of, you know, there is this like element of like, we've just gone through something that is so life-changing, you know?
But there's no way to short circuit that. Like, you don't like,
no,
you can't like just skip ahead.
No.
And I think that's the realistic part of this, of like, the goal of this is not to be like, and if you hang in there, you too will get to a happy spot. Cause like, you might not, like, it's just, some sufferings are forever or ongoing, but there can be some joy in the middle of them. And I don't know, like, there's not ever this like, oh, I've crossed over and now things are good. However, there is a lot of joy. And so my goal of every episode is like, my goal is so that like we just weep uncontrollably. No, maybe not. But like, I mean, talking about the sad things, the hard things, like be honest, like these are difficult things, but then also to laugh, to have joy. One of the things when we were writing initially, so we had a book published a few years ago, which I'm a terrible salesperson.
I was just gonna say, now's your time to plug it.
Yeah. Go read our book.
I don't even know the title. What is it? I need to know so I can plug it in the background.
You've read it though, right?
I read it.
Yeah,
no,
you read
it means the world to me, Tristan. I just don't know the title.
No, I'm not asking for compliments. No, it's called A Life After Death.
And you can find it on Amazon.
We'll put it on the notes at the bottom. No, but I'm a terrible salesperson because I always tell people it's a really bleak book. It's like really, really sad.
Yeah.
Which,
oh my gosh.
It's really sad. And part of it was like we were blogging, that we kind of came out of our blog. So our book is just like a memoir of what we went through. And I am not like this like optimistic person.
No.
So I'll tell you, I don't know if I've told you this. When some friends of ours were like, hey, you should like submit this to a publisher. And so we submitted it, and they said they would publish it. But I hadn't, like, I'd kind of set it aside for several years, and I was going back and doing the editing, and I'd set it aside. And then I took all of our writings and I started like reading through them and editing them. And I cut the book. I sat down and read the whole thing in like a couple of days. And I was like so depressed. I'm like, this guy, whoever wrote this is terrible. Like, that was me. Right. Yeah. But it was like, here's how I describe it. It was like, hey, do you want to hear another terrible thing that happened to us?
Like, one more story.
Like, if you thought you were sad enough, just keep reading. Yeah. So we edited it down. Like I cut about like 50%, not 50%. I cut about 33%. I cut it in a third of it out.
Yeah.
Because it was just too bleak, and I was like depressing myself, and I'm the one who wrote it. So
that's a good point. That is also what we're hoping for this podcast is we want to be so authentically ourselves that one day we look back and we're like, can't believe I said that. Like, that was a really gloomy podcast, or that was like, you know, whatever. Because yes, like there are I wrote a blog. I started it and I haven't written in a while now, but it's like, there are some posts I deleted because it felt so, I could just feel my hurt in the moment. You know, it wasn't like a high shining character moment when I wrote it, you know? And so
you cleaned it up. See, I just let it all out there for the world to see.
Yeah.
People are like,
but that's the thing about this podcast. We can't really do that. We won't. Once it's out there, it's out there.
Yeah. And I think you should be like, we should be authentic, but there's another side of this though, like where I'm like, I don't want pity and I don't want to be bleak to be bleak. I just want to say like, look, like these are real things. They're really hard. Let's be honest about those. Let's cry about them, or let's talk about the dark things, because there are dark things in this world. And I don't think it's helpful to gloss over those to try to get through it. And so like by the title of this podcast, it's not like, oh, face these difficult things and eventually you'll get through them, but some sort of like integrated reality where you go through hard things, and you will go through hard things. And if things are going well, Kayla, they will get bad again. Yes. I'm here to remind you of that.
And if they're bad, you will find joy again.
I don't know about that. I'm still
This is a fundamental disagreement we'll continue to have.
Yeah.
But
no,
anyways.
but you, like, these things do integrate. So like a lot of people asked us, like, as they read our blog, which was really pretty, it was the difficult things. Like, man, you guys just seem depressed all the time. I think they felt sorry for us. And I would say like, no, this is just like where we're documenting some of the hardest things, but like our life is full of happiness and joy, and we've got a big family, and we've got lots of laughter and lots of kids crying and kids fighting, and it's a big jumbled mess, but there is a lot of joy. And so that's the goal. The goal is to cry on every episode and talk about like the worst things, but then also to like joke about some things and have some hopeful moments. And that's my like goal with this. And hopefully like people, my hope is people will listen into this, and maybe even if they're in the spot of like despairing, right? Like the worst of it, that we're a little bit far enough removed that we can still talk about the hard things. And I hope that people know that we take those things very seriously, that they're not to be glossed over. There is real suffering, but a joyful tone at the same time.
Yeah.
And I find that with you guys, like you guys have navigated some very difficult things with Nolan over the last couple of years, but you guys have maintained like a spirit of joy and I don't know. I think this will be a fun experiment to do.
Yeah.
together.
And maybe even as you're talking to him, like maybe it's even the more a word of like peace too, like where sometimes you're not feeling joyful, but you can just become more at peace with like the order of things and just the situation. Yeah. But I agree with everything you said. I think that's exactly what our goal is.
Yeah. I've had this idea too of just like, I like to hear people's stories. I like to know like not just the superficial of what's going on in people's lives. And so hopefully this will be an avenue to get to know some other people. And I don't know like how we'll work all this out, if like we'll switch off and on as far as who can host. And
currently we have 2 microphones, so we're gonna have to
no I've got another one over there.
Do we?
It's we've got, I mean, I don't know how to do all this stuff, but we're learning the technology. But yeah, we just trying to figure out how to do this logistically. But
so one of my most exciting things I think is going to be I went into my field of speech pathology because I love hearing people's stories. And initially I started with like working with older adults that have had strokes and brain injuries and that kind of thing. And my favorite part of that was helping like get words out, like tell me about your life, like tell me who's your husband or your, like tell me, because if you don't know, people that have had brain injuries and strokes sometimes can't communicate after they've had them. And so I love that element. Like I can't wait to just hear people's authentic stories and see what it's like to be on the other side.
And to hear like I think in our culture, maybe at some level, we are we don't like to hear about the hard and the gritty and the difficult, and so like to give a space to say like, no, we want to talk about these things. And like I want to know what it's like to go through really hard things. Like I think it prepares us to face the difficulties, because we will have suffering in our life. Like this is a promise. Like you will go through hard things, but we don't have to do it without hope, and we don't have to do it without joy. And these things are very integrated in our lives. And so and what a beautiful thing. Like you're dealing with people who are like, a stroke victim is a terrible thing, but to say like you still have a story, and that's it. That's an interesting reason for going into speech pathology. Like I didn't know that about you. So
yeah,
you're so optimistic. You're like, I just want to hear people's stories.
No,
You're so
it's not though. Because seriously, that's like, it's so hard. I mean, if imagine not being able to communicate and how hard, but I think that's maybe a backwards way of saying why this is intriguing to me, but that is exactly why it's like, there's so much life and so much story in those brains. And I just wanted to like, no, tell me all about your life. And you've experienced so much. And it's the same now with suffering. I feel like I used to look at people that were in the midst of suffering or had gone through something hard. And it's almost like, oh geez, like, I hope I never experienced that, right. And now it's like, I am so inspired by you. Like, and not that you have to be inspirational going through suffering, because you don't. You just have to live it. But I'm more intrigued and I want to know more about people's stories when they've experienced hardship. I don't know, for some reason it gives you...
I think it's common to run away from that, right? Like, I think this is true of even me. Like, I think before we lost Maria, there was a sense of when people went through really hard times, it's like you don't know what to say, you don't know how to relate to them. It can be pretty easy to just be like, I'm just not sure what to do. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to be awkward. So it's maybe just easier to avoid them. Yeah,
like they have so many people asking questions, or like so many people bringing them meals. Yeah,
and I'm just like I'm like interested. Yeah. Now, not like in a weird like
fascinated.
Kind of, yeah. No, but like I don't want to be that kind of person who runs away from the hardest things of life, because life is difficult, and to be able to engage it openly is good.
And live authentically, I think, and helping understand other people's authentic selves is more. It just helps us to understand each other. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we should be able to ask like all the difficult and awkward questions. I think that's maybe pressing into like the things that are like, I can't believe you asked that. I want to be the awkward host who. So I'll tell you, there's a story, and I don't think it's even true, but I love this story. So I've retold it a number of times. There's a philosopher named Peter Kraft, who I've read a lot of his books. He's still living. He's at Boston College. He's getting up there in age, but he's a great writer. And in the footnote in one of his books, so it's like, no, it's not a footnote. It was an endnote. So it was in the back of the book. I read this story, and it's a apocryphal story. Like, they don't know if it's true because it wasn't documented close to the time, but it's a story of Thomas More. And Thomas More, back in the 1500s, these are like kinds of times of religious bickering and all this stuff. But Thomas More's a fascinating character. He held to his faith against King Henry VIII, and he would not bend. And he was married and had a family, and but he would not give in to Henry VIII. Over these things. So anyway, that's the backdrop. But basically to the point where Thomas More was going to be executed for not giving King Henry what he wanted. So he was like religiously persecuted. Like he stuck to his principles to the end. And in this little footnote at the end of Peter Kraft's book, it says, there's this old account. It says that Thomas More like approached the hangman, like the guy and he was going to have his head chopped off, right? Like they were going to put his head on the block and chop it off with an axe. And it says, Thomas More, having a very glorious beard, said to the hangman, can I hang the beard over the block as to not have my beard chopped? And it says, and with a jest, he forfeited his life, which I feel is the greatest. Like, it probably never actually even happened, but I love this story so much that here he is, like a husband and father going to death for like principle of what he believes, like great suffering. And he cracks a joke before he's dead, like about like, don't cut my beard when you chop my head off. I don't know where I'm going with that story, but there's something about that story that I like want to be about this podcast. It's like the worst thing ever. This guy is going to be executed, which is horrible and difficult. And yet that's funny. Like, I'm sorry. It's kind of a funny joke. If he pulled it up, like, who else can crack a joke in the worst circumstance other than a person who has like a real hope?
A real hope. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a long story.
Yeah.
I don't know if it fits here.
I
think it's hilarious. I tell this story all the time now. It's like,
even if it doesn't fit, Tristan, you've told the story now. So that'll work.
Yeah,
that'll work.
So that's my goal, is like to say really awkward, funny things. But yeah, anyway, I do find fascinating the hard things in life, but like, how do you endure them? And if like, I mean, like,
how do you endure it? Like each person, it's interesting to listen to, because even you and I, like, we've had conversations and, both people of faith, but it's like, you'll be like, I don't think of it that way. Or I don't, it's fascinating to learn just how do you endure? Yeah.
So, thoughts for the podcast? Any other ideas or any other things like you're like excited about or want to cover, or things?
Should we like just throw around a couple of like topics that we've talked about? Would that be helpful?
Sure.
To like kind of maybe hold ourselves accountable, or like, or just, get some ideas.
This will be the last episode, by the way. Yeah. I hear this about podcasts. It's like you get one episode in and there's like, it never happens again.
Yeah.
And by the way, we've been trying to do this for like 2 months.
Yes.
And my goal was like, we want to get rolling in December, and now it's February.
Yeah.
We've been sick for so long.
Yeah.
Like I had pneumonia this past month. Yeah. And so like, this has been a long time coming.
You can ask some of my biggest fans in my life, my mom, my friends. They're like, when can we listen to a podcast? I'm like, guys, I know you're all dying. Our four fans.
Our 4 fans, like your mom, your mother-in-law, my mom.
Yeah.
That's maybe 3 fans. There you go.
So this is for you all. We did it. We finally did it.
This will be the last episode. It was great.
No, but some topics of conversation we've talked about, like, well, first of all, just interviewing people is a huge goal of ours. And then we'd love to talk about, like, what's the word we were just talking about? I was saying with Nolan, I don't want to kind of
exploit him.
Exploiting. Like exploiting.
That's good. Let's talk about that.
Circumstances.
Yeah. I think that's definitely something we want to avoid, because I want to.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good idea. Like, I want to invite people in who've gone through really hard things, and I want to hear their story. But there is a fine line between being very open and talking about the hardest things and some sort of exploitation.
Feeling sorry for ourselves, or feeling like pity for somebody, or, oh my gosh, I can't believe that story.
I don't know about you. It drove me nuts when people would pity us.
Oh my gosh. That was the biggest thing.
It was, and you know what? It was a fine line, right?
Yeah.
Because people a lot of times would like really know how to enter into our grief and do it in such like grace and so good. But then there would be other people that are like, oh, that's that family who lost the child.
Like driving away, like, oh, I'm so thankful for my family.
Yeah.
Like we have healthy children, and like everybody's here, and we're just going to go home. And you can just get that sense.
What is it about that?
I don't know.
It just drove me crazy, because I don't know. It is.
Yeah. Or is it just me in a low point where I sense that from people, like,
I don't think pity's a good, I don't think we should seek it.
No.
I mean, like, I think we should, like, I didn't want people to pity me. I wanted people to enter in and be present. Yeah. And to give me the freedom to say like whatever, and to be very honest, but I didn't want them to just like pat me on the back and like feel like, I didn't want that. I don't know. I'm not sure how to articulate that, but it was not a good.
And for me, especially with Nolan, is like, he is such a cool little guy, and so you can tell when somebody's like, oh, the poor guy, like he can't do this and he can't do that, and it's and then you're not authentically like taking time to understand him or to know our family. That's maybe what it is. It kind of points to like maybe you don't fully comprehend. Maybe not even.
Is it like this? Because I'm like. If people are like, oh, poor Nolan or whatever, it's like, that's my son. I love him.
Like, he's so cute.
Like,
he's
like,
so cute.
He's got problems, and he has really serious problems, and those are hard.
but there's so much joy too.
And
yeah.
we love him.
Yeah.
And so, there is something about that, like the pitying is kind of like keeping outside of it.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, whew, glad I'm not you.
Can't imagine. Yes. I can't imagine that.
And it does keep you outside of it in some ways. Cause I always felt that way with pity of like, you don't really want to be, if you're pitying me, you don't really want to be around me. Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
I was going
to say, you've told us some stories of like, you were not fun to be around.
I was not fun. Like, fair enough. Like, yeah, there was times.
Same here.
Yeah. Like, there was times where I'm like, oh my gosh, like, why would anybody want to hang out with me? But the really good friends that did, they could push through my like horrible bleakness. Like there was such a grace
still feel that
there.
way. I feel so different in that way. Like,
yeah.
I've told my friends that a million times. Like, I was such a more fun friend to have before, and or just it just changes you. You become a little bit more. But you know what? Like, I'll be there for my friends, like in the low times more than I probably would have pre Nolan. So
yeah.
But yeah, that's a topic we want to cover. Is like, what is it like to exploit, and maybe that's just a conversation too. But.
Yeah. Well, I think, and to exploit is to like. Some sort of like trying to platform these things to get something out of it. Or you even talked about this, like, Nolan has lots of, kind of different degrees of disabilities and struggles. And you never, like you said something like, you don't want to talk about him in a way that's like, if he listens to this someday, you don't want to like he was like
such a burden.
Yeah. Such a burden, such a problem. And I'm like, yeah, of course not.
Yeah.
Like we hope that he does well and we just delete this episode forever, at some level, but it's also
or just, like that's part of what the podcast is for too, is just to like be reminded of like there are rough times that we've had, and it's real, and it doesn't take away from like, if he can talk and listen to this someday, like, gosh.
And I think like knowing you, even when you talk about like, you love Nolan, you love your son, you give anything, you and Paul are good parents. You love him deeply, to where none of this is exploitation in any way.
Yeah.
Because it is hard right now, and you've been through really hard things, and that's not going to change. And your hope is that like he will be able to look back and be like, "Oh, Mom, why are you talking about me or whatever?" and roll his eyes at you like he should. But I think there's a fine line there, isn't there? I mean, I know people who like, there's just something where they just want to platform their difficulties. And I don't like, that's not you guys at all. I don't think it's us.
No. Yeah.
But it's a fine line.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like really interested in people's hard stories, but like not to get something out of it. Like, I just want to hear like, what is that like to go through that thing, and how are you making it?
Yeah.
Because people are amazing and what they can endure.
That's what it is. It maybe doesn't, it makes you realize like you're human and you're not going to be inspirational, but you can just be a human and like endure something. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
It's listening to somebody's story, and it maybe puts, because sometimes when you hear people's stories, you're like, oh, we could never deal with, like, we heard that so much with Nolan. People be like, oh, I could never handle it. It's like, you could, or maybe you can't.
Maybe you can't.
No, but
you probably would.
But there is a reality of like, you probably could handle it.
Yeah.
And so it maybe gives you some more peace for like, the trials will come, right?
Yeah.
It's not just the person we're listening to's story. It's like all of us will be there at certain points where we are in the lowest of the low.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point of the podcast, I think, is to just be reminded of, man, like, it can be really hard, and you can do it,
I've been reading, this last year I've been reading a book on like just Christian saints. And one of the things I've noticed is like, you read most of the great heroes of the Christian faith, almost all of their stories have like horrible elements in them of like, this person like was like martyred, or this person like went through all of these difficult things and they had great faith and they overcame, or something like really tragic happened. And what I've come to realize, I think, is like, there's no saints that were like, they were born into a like super easy household, had a great childhood. Everything went well. They got a great job. They had a happy family. no problems at all, and then they died.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, part of the suffering is in the formation of the great things that they were able to do and overcome. And it's actually like, in some ways, looking back, it's like, that's like why they were great, because God like led them through very difficult things and they overcame. And that's the beauty of it. Mm-hmm. And now granted, I am selfish and I would much rather take the easy life, right? Like, like I would rather live in the world where my daughter didn't die, and like, and like you'd live in a world where Nolan didn't have all the like in many ways, but it's also like in these things that there is something deeper going on. And I'm interested in that kind of stuff because there is something beautiful happening in the hardest things. And God does use those things, but it's not easy. And so I just think if you gloss over it, it's like, that's not right. If you're like, oh yeah, suffering, it's amazing because it strengthens us. It's like, no, it's terrible.
No,
I hate it. It's horrible.
Yeah.
But it's also like, there is good things that happen in the hardest things in life. And so I'm fascinated by that kind of stuff. And to hear it in not just like the lives of people in the past, which is a little bit removed, but like in people's lives that we encounter every day. And that's what we want to like engage in this time together. So, cause I'm interested in your story. Like
same. Yeah.
And as we've walked together, and yet like, it's not a weird fascination. It's just like, you guys have gone, like, there's a certain sense. I'm like, I don't know how you guys do all the things that you've done. Not in a pitying sense of like, oh, I'm glad it's not me or something, but like you guys have like done some heroically virtuous things, and it probably doesn't feel that way to you.
I was gonna say you are too gracious.
No, but like,
but I get what you're saying in the sense of like, you can look at other people's suffering and it's easy to say, it's easy to look at it and be inspired without really even.
Well, and you can see
I don't think we've done anything inspirational, I guess is what I'm saying, but yet you can look at somebody else and think, but you've endured it and you found joy and you've,
fair enough. I think it's far easier to see on the outside, and obviously not like, they're not going to like, you guys are broken. I know that you're a mess. You're a train wreck.
We don't handle it.
No, but like you guys have gone through a lot of hard things, and just watching you and Paul, like you've grown a lot, you've handled it well, you've been honest, you've had joy. Like you're like, that's why like I wanted to do this with you, because I think it's like, we've seen that in you, but I know it's easier to see those things in another person. People say that to us. Like, they're like, Tristan, like, I don't, like, you and Jill have held the faith, like, despite going through great tragedy. And I'm always like, whatever. In fact, I've got a common thing that I say. We got teenage daughters now, and they've heard me like give so many talks on grief now that they could probably give them. So like, they're probably, if they're watching this, of course they're not going to watch this, but if they were, they'd be rolling their eyes at me right now, because what I've said to people is like, yeah, here's my faith. Like in John chapter 6, Jesus says to the people, he says like, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no part with me. And then it says that many left him, for this was a very hard saying. And then Jesus says to Peter, he's like, are you too going to leave? And Peter's like, where else am I going to go? And that's like my response. I'm like, that's like where I'm at. I'm like, people are like, you've had such good faith. I'm like, I ain't got much faith. But what am I going to do? Like just despair and give up all hope? I mean, like, if there is a God, like, I don't understand any of this suffering, but if there is a God, I at least believe that he's with us and will help us through this to some degree.
So much more hopeful.
In some ways, even though like some days I was close to despairing or whatever, but I never gave up the faith in the same way that Peter's like, I got no other options. Like, this is all I've got. If like I leave you, I've got nothing. And so it doesn't seem heroic.
I felt that so immensely when we were driving home from the NICU. So the first time we left the NICU was probably like maybe a week after Nolan was born. So we were life flighted down to kind of brief thing, but my son was born with medical complexities. We were life flighted down to Children's, and we were in the NICU for a week learning all this really hard news. We were separated from our daughter, who was 2 at the time. And essentially we would eventually like kind of be separated from each other at times, but from me and my husband. But all that to be said, I remember we were leaving the NICU driving to Paul's parents' house to spend, and it was the first night we had left the NICU, and we were going to go see Nora, our daughter. And I remember that exact feeling. I remember it's like, you know, especially in our culture, it's like, what do we value really above a lot of things is like our health, our ability to like be together. And all of that was uprooted. And we weren't even together. I didn't even have a family. Like we were separated, and it felt like part of my heart was in a different location. And I remember just like the same sentiment of like, I don't have anything but God right now. Like the only thing that's constant in my life is hope in something. 'Cause this is the thing that I think a lot of people would say is a basic thing that kind of keeps you going, is knowing that you have family and you have, and at that point it was all gone from me for a while.
What do you hold on to when everything is like being stripped apart and you're at the lowest point? And that's, to me, it's like, how do we do that? How do we talk about that? And if you short circuit the absolute despair of that moment, you're short circuiting, what faith ultimately is. Yeah. And frankly, I mean, like, I think there's a lot of people that are like, give up on any type of faith because it's like, you have clearly not answered my prayers. So what good are you? Mm-hmm. But my experience is the opposite of like, if God's not real, like, what does anything make sense? Like, there's no hope in anything. Like, and there's nothing to do but despair. And yet that is not easy. It's not like, this is not a naive kind of like hope. It's not.
Well, we might as well. No, for sure. But it's getting to that point of, our new pastor gave a sermon a couple weeks ago, but he was talking about, I think it's C.S. Lewis.
I'm sure it wasn't as good as mine.
No,
just kidding. No, he's great. We love him. Sorry to interrupt. Carry on.
Anyways, I actually listened to this guy's sermon.
Oh yeah.
Just kidding.
Ouch. No,
I'm totally kidding. But he was talking about C.S. Lewis. He's like, he gives like an example of I'm totally messing up this sermon. I obviously wasn't listening close enough, but
we're not editing any of this out, you know.
Right. So but the gist of it was like an atheist point of view of like, suffering is just, it's meaningless. It's pointless. It's, it's just, there's no hope. There's no, and and that is exactly kind of where I came to too, where it's like, if there's no purpose, if there's no growth, if there's no hope, yes, it's really hard to get to that truth. Yeah. But what a sad world to live in if you would just think that there's no purpose. And granted, at times I probably felt that way in the lowest of my lows. I don't know, but I think that's the way I've grown the most throughout suffering, is just trusting in the purpose.
Like, there's good things that can come of it, but it's not good.
No,
like, that's the thing. I think there's a fine line between like, oh yeah, this is great. No, it's not good. None of it's good. Like, but there's still hope. There's still redemption. There can be peace. But that doesn't mean that it's easy. And so I think that's what we want to do here, right? Like, we want to talk about the hard things. We want to do so with maybe a smirk on our face at times, and joy, and the goal. I've told Kayla the goal is to make me cry every episode, and I don't know. We'll see how that goes. It's so far it's easier to laugh. I don't know, but
we're maybe not in the trenches as much as we've been. Yeah,
fair enough. Yeah.
But maybe we'll get there with some of our guests, or who knows.
Yeah. No, and that's what we say about our family right now, because especially people who've just like read our book, which is bleak. And if people have read it, because there's people that read it, like they've reached out to me that I don't know, and they came across it somewhere or whatever, and it is like really dark. And I think they look at my family like, oh my gosh, this guy's so sad. And the reality,
and they're so right.
They are, yeah. I'm yeah. No, we laugh a lot. Like, my kids are super joyful.
They are, yeah.
And our family's mostly happy. But we're also like, we're 8 years out, right? Mm-hmm. We're 8 years out. Like, things do change over time, and there's a lot of grace in that. So yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Anything else? I don't know. This is a hopefully fun journey we're entering into.
Yeah, we're excited about it.
Yeah, it'll be good. Thanks to tonight to Jill and Paul, who are juggling children. I feel like we should just stay here and
we should also clarify, like, why our spouses aren't necessarily part of this, because we tend to be more verbal processors and our spouses are a lot more internal processors. And so this has been a fun journey for the four of us, but we will probably be on the mic more than they will be on the mics.
Yeah. Our spouses are better than us too. Like they're just far, like they're actually doing the hard work of juggling children. And we're just trying to like stretch this out as long as possible. It's like the most relaxed I've been in a long time.
No. They have a lot better things to say. It's just a lot less of the time that they vocalize them. So we've just felt, will just say a lot of things.
Is that everybody listening to the podcast is like, yeah, that could have been 5 minutes.
Exactly. Paul and Jill would have got on here and they would have been like, thank you and good night.
Like
We've said enough.
Jill would have said like 3 really wise things and Paul would have been like very insightful and it would have been over. And you're like, you could have done that so much quicker. And here we're at like, I don't know, 35, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And they're
people are like,
get to the point.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of our podcast. Please share and like and subscribe to be a part of the Other Side of Hurt community. Also, if you are somebody who has recently suffered the loss of a child, or if you know of a family, we are going to link to our website, Smile Again Grief Ministries, below. And we would love to connect with you to see if there's anything we can do as we walk together in some of the most difficult things that families go through. God bless you.